Okay. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this session of Lean Agile Delivery Coaching Network and Digital Transformation in London. Both communities, have the same event together. Today we have Colin Duff as a speaker about jobs to be done, as you can see in the screen that he's sharing. Before leaving the stage to Colin, let me just remind that this is the monthly event that we normally have, and also that we are going to record this session, as you can see, and that all the recordings are available in our YouTube channel that you can find easily with @Agile Meetup, very easy to remember. So this is our channel on YouTube. And clearly we have also a group on LinkedIn. I will put the link in the chat so you can ask, you can have an invitation practically to join this group on LinkedIn, where we can continue the conversation eventually after the meeting. Everyone will be there, so it's easier to use the chat on LinkedIn that maybe on meetup.com. Actually, this is all from me, so I will give the word, the power and control to Colin. And thank you, Colin, for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Corrado, and everyone for giving up your time. So over the next hour, we're going to be doing a masterclass in how to apply jobs to be done. And I'm going to bring it to life through 2 technology case studies, which are quite sexy and haven't been publicly shown before. It's still a method, actually, where a lot of the examples are quite trite or a bit boring. So hopefully they'll be exciting as well as useful. Just by way of background, I've been working in the insight for innovation space for over 20 years now. I've worked on everything from PCs to pensions to prisons to probably many other Ps as well. And the first half of my career, I spent using traditional insight techniques like design thinking. And over the last 10 years, and particularly 5, I've really focused more into jobs to be done. My experience is mainly in enterprise innovation. And what I'll cover today, I'm just going to do a really quick recap on what jobs to be done is. Then I'm going to dive into 2 case studies that bring the process and method to life, and I'll call out some tips like the latest usage of AI, for example. And then I'll end just with a couple of different approaches to using the methods in a lightweight sprint type format or in a more comprehensive strategic project area as well. And we'll end with questions, but if there is anything as I go through, do put it in the chat so we can save it up, or I'll address it if I see it pop up. So just before I kick off though, it'd be really useful to help me collaborate, and I'll genuinely be interested. On a scale of 1 to 10, if everybody can put in the chat, how would you rate your current level of understanding of jobs to be done? So 1 is, you know, very little, and 10 is you're an expert. So everybody can just add in the chat and let's see what it's coming up. Okay, 1. Interesting. So I'm seeing scores between we've got between a 1 to a 5. I'd say this is, well, 1-6 actually. So I don't know what jobs to be done means. Great. So really interesting for me, jobs to be done is a top 3 innovation method alongside design thinking and lean startup. But despite having been around for over 20 years now, it's still very nascent and it's widely misunderstood as well. So there's a real Dunning-Kruger effect where even people who think they know it often are talking about something else entirely. So hopefully we'll remedy that and whet your appetite to find out more today. The easiest way to think about jobs to be done is it's both a mindset as well as a method to approach innovation or really customer-oriented problem solving. And the analogy that's always given is there's a famous quote from a Harvard Business School professor: people don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. And that's really an analogy for the way most companies approach innovation. So they tend to think through a product lens. So if it's the drill, how can we improve the features and functionality, rather than thinking through an outcome lens of what is the customer need. Now, the problem with doing that is you end up over the long term in a features trap where typically delivering more functionality becomes almost seen as valuable rather than actually delivering more value to customers. And there's another quote I really like, and it says that the electric light wasn't invented through the continuous improvement of the candle. And I tell this to a lot of product teams, and they nod along and say, yeah, but it's not us. So I thought a really fun example. This is a real world Amazon product description for a television. And you don't need to read all of it, but what it looks like someone's did is they've taken their roadmap, copied and pasted it into the description. And it's really a good symbol of how, again, teams are really approaching innovation. I was working with a big supermarket a couple of years ago, and they said our number one is to improve convenience. And I said, well, what do you mean? So they were, for example, cutting on demand delivery from 1 hour slots to 30 minutes. And I said, well, how would you know when you've actually delivered convenience? They had no idea. They were just copying the competitors, caught in this features arms race. And this is really what Jobs to be Done will do. It'll get you out of that and into finding, particularly in breakthrough innovation, pinpointing unmet customer needs, which are the source of innovation. And Jobs to be Done, it has 8 key principles. I've simplified it for today to just 4, which are the most important, and I'll be talking about through the case studies. And the first one of those is that people don't actually generally buy products for their features. They buy them because they want to get a job done. And to give you an example, why do people buy Peloton? Well, on the surface, it's a fitness bike, so I buy it to get fit. But if you think about the job, it's actually what it's delivering uniquely is a really highly engaging and highly intense exercise class at home through its screen and the subscription service. Or you take why are people buying VPN? I mean, the publicly stated benefit is security and privacy, but for many people, it's actually to enable them to watch TV abroad. Or I heard someone giving a great use case where if you hide your locality, you can get cheaper airfares. Now, another principle on Jobs to be Done, and this is a really big one for innovation, is jobs are stable over time. So if I take the job, listen to music, that's been around since the Roman times, thousands of years. Clearly, the methods and the technologies have changed, particularly recently. But the reason this is a really big deal and innovating around jobs rather than traditional needs is great for breakthrough innovation is when you get a black swan event, so something unexpected like AI emerges very quickly, much more so than most people had expected. If you're basing a roadmap and your innovation around jobs, you don't need to rip it up. Where you're aiming those targets will be consistent. Whereas if you're using a more conventional needs approach and something happens like AI, you need to rip up and start again. Another principle of Jobs to be Done is jobs are context specific. So a really simple example, take the job of me boosting my energy. In the morning, I might want a caffeine shot. Before the gym, it might be creatine, or if I'm going clubbing, it might be a can of Red Bull. But it's amazing how many companies do not consider context because it doesn't fit into CRM, ERP, it doesn't fit into spreadsheets. And often you'll see people exhibiting, I'll give you many examples, users, perverse or really strange behaviors that make no sense. But if you unpack the context, they make a lot of sense. So for example, there's a really famous story about McDonald's, and lots of customers are going along early in the morning and buying a milkshake for breakfast. Now, why would you do that? Well, it turns out that in the context of commuting to work in the car, a milkshake does the job far better than a lot of the alternatives. Why is that? Well, you can hold a milkshake with one hand. It energizes you in the morning. It keeps you full. There's no mess. If you're eating a bagel and try to do it when you drive, it doesn't really work. So just in that very specific scenario, that solves the job better than the competition. And then the final principle I'll talk about is focusing on the job rather than the customer, which sounds almost antithesis of being customer centric, can unlock new innovations. So the famous example in Jobs to be Done is Snickers. So nominally a Snickers is a chocolate bar similar to a Milky Way, and that's where it competes. But actually the reason Snickers are hired is actually satisfy hunger quickly, often on the go. And most organizations here, they've got lots and lots of data, more than ever, but their innovation failure rate is low. So it's almost they're correcting the wrong kind of data. They're masters of description, so they can tell you in greater detail than ever who buys, when they buy, what they buy, but they can't tell you often why they buy. And the why, the underlying goals, is really the genesis of Jobs to be Done. Now, I often go through this presentation or a more extended format with executives pitching for business, and you get a lot of head nods, but you often, frankly, get a lot of cynicism and people saying, is this just a fad, or it's common sense, or yeah, it's all fine milkshakes and Snickers, but how does it apply to my business? So we faced this scenario last year. We're pitching, some colleagues and I, to a big car sales platform. So their model was they sell advertising to dealers who advertise cars to end users. And they're saying, yeah, how would this work for us? Now, their challenge they came with was, we want to double the size of our business, which in a mature market with low margins and really highly competitive, very tough ask. The two other agencies going in had said, we'll do creative thinking and brainstorming. Forget it. But anyway, so I said, well, look, let's think about this through the dealer's jobs. Now, currently, all you deliver is you let them advertise, and they also did some branding support for forecourts. But what else is a dealer trying to get done that you could help them with? Now, their initial response is, oh, you mean like SEO and content marketing? And I said, yeah, that's great, but that's going to get you like 5% lift, 10% optimistically. Let's think across the entire dealer value chain of they're acquiring inventory, preparing vehicles, they're making sales, etc. And using this lens, and I generated this very quickly through AI, it was like a light bulb going off for this company to say, we've never really thought about the world this way before. And it was a big conglomerate that did many other things. And one of the surprising areas they were gravitating towards is saying, we've got thousands of people we manage, remote engineers. I wonder if staff management, which was not on the radar, could be an interesting target for innovation. And they'd also said, interestingly as well, with no appetite for doing market research, it's a waste of time. It tells us what we already know. But when I said, well, what jobs do you know about the other jobs? Very little. So actually, they're much more amenable to doing some research as well. The Jobs to be Done process, it's 4 stages, and Jobs to be Done really is focused on identifying customer needs, particularly getting you new news around innovation insight. So kind of unlocking those aha moments that lead to the breakthroughs. It doesn't help you develop the innovation per se, but it does give you very clear clarity on where you should innovate. And the process, which I'm going to take you through with the case studies, is you scope the area for innovation. So that's who are you targeting, what is the job, in which circumstances. Then we visualize all of those steps. Then we run some interviews to understand what's going on. And finally, we develop what we call outcome statements. So these are the success criteria for performing the job. And that's what I'm going to walk you through now. And armed with those, you would then go into an innovation process like a design sprint, or carry on with the design thinking process after the empathize phase. Now, pick today, I mentioned I wanted to give you a sexy case study, something that's really topical, and also something that's quite difficult. And I picked virtual collaboration because it's a heavily researched category. Hundreds of millions have went into developing innovation, so it's really hard to do some new stuff. And I want to show you the power of Jobs to be Done, giving you this different lens than classic insight. So the first stage in Jobs to be Done is scoping. And what we do here is we look at what we conventionally call the user, we call the job performer. Now, often it's very obvious who these people are. So in this instance, it's a workshop facilitator. As I mentioned before, though, we don't typically use demographic information, so things like age. We try and keep it much more agnostic and general. We then think about what is the target job. So this is what is the underlying goal they're trying to do. So facilitate a virtual workshop. And really important, we don't imply any product, any technology or method. And then we think about different circumstances we're going to tackle. So it might be, is this large meetings or small meetings? Is this English only, or is there going to be foreign languages, or is this going to be a really confidential meeting? Those kind of things, because it gives us more texture to innovate around. Now, the next stage, and this is really where the magic happens in jobs to be done, in my view, is we do this thing called, we create a jobs map, which is where we visualize the process. So what the user is trying to get done in lots of detail. And a jobs map describes a needs view independent of the solution. So it's not a customer journey map. There's no touch points, there's no technology, there's no emotion. And what we're doing here is, for this big job of facilitating a virtual workshop, we break it down into what are some of the pre-stages, what's happening during, and what happens after. So that's applicable to any job. And then it's quite intuitive to just think about what are the stages and then what are the little jobs. Now, if you read through these, what's really interesting is, and I challenge you to do it, any one of these would have been the same 20 years ago, or even actually 200 years ago. Now, clearly something like scheduling a workshop back in Roman times, they didn't have Calendly and some other apps, but the actual underlying goal was the same. Now, I see a lot of people, and in the books I've read in Jobs to be Done, they only really talk about this level, what we call the big job or the little job, but really to unlock the breakthrough insights, you need to go down even a stage further into what we call micro jobs. So if I give you an example of, in a workshop, we are presenting a topic, some of those micro jobs might be rehearsing a presentation, delivering it, audience interaction, etc. Now, I'll show you the reason this is useful in a moment and the innovations that can lead to. But the next stage in our process, and it's similar skill set to classic approaches like design thinking, is to interview users or job performers. So we recommend doing about 8 to 12, and then you'll get consistent themes and patterns of behavior. We always do them for at least 60 minutes. The reason being, I know some people recommend 30 to 45. To drill down into this micro job level just takes a lot of time to ask questions. And we, for software, typically do them virtually, but for non-software, we'll always do them face-to-face using what's called contextual inquiry. And it's really important that where you're working on something like, for example, a lawnmower, you actually see someone using it. So you'll discover, as we did with Honda, that their big, powerful lawnmowers do not work well going up hills. They're too heavy. Or their power generators, they get stuck in the mud when it's raining because the wheels are not big enough. Or you do something like canned fish, and you realize it's really good until you see a lady scrubbing her nails after she'd made lunch because she's got the fishy residue in her fingers, and they launched pre-drained tuna to get rid of that, right? Huge innovation that you just won't get through virtual insight alone. Now, when you're doing a jobs interview, it's very different than a classic research interview. So if you're using design thinking, you'll typically focus on pains and gains. What do you like about this product? What don't you like? How could we improve it? I simplify slightly. In Jobs to be Done, what we do is we use the jobs map here and get people in real granular detail to go through each of the stages and talk about what they were trying to achieve, what different circumstances impacted upon it, and where the struggling moments, which is the language instead of pain points we use, are, to really zoom in on where are the opportunities for innovation and identify these outcomes, so the success metrics. Now, I wanted to give, for anyone who's been involved in Jobs to be Done, a few tips when you interview. One thing we find really useful is to send the jobs map in advance so that the interviewee can orientate themselves. Because one of the things we like to do is get them to validate it's correct. Are there any additional stages we've missed? And then we always recommend using the story technique. So that is, tell me about a time when. Now, the reason that's really important is when you interview people, there's a horrible tendency to generalize, or often people will talk about their family or their friends rather than themselves. And to really get them to zoom in on a story, we'll often ask things like, well, what day was it? Was it the weekend? What was the weather like? So you're really trying to unlock that subconscious thinking. The other two key tips are, jobs to be done is very much about needs. It's not solutions. So in design thinking, it's actually okay if people say, oh, you should do X or Y. Here, we really want to stick on what is it, the underlying goal, not the solution. And the biggest mistake people who are new to jobs to be done make is they'll ask, why did you hire this product? Now, in fairness, in one of the key books in jobs to be done, it recommends doing that. But the reason it's a really bad idea is a bit like at the outset when I gave you the example of the drill. If you ask why did you hire the drill, they'll probably say to drill a hole, whereas actually what they were actually trying to do was to put up a picture or a bookshelf, which is why you shouldn't ask that question. The next stage in
sorry, Colin, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt. There are a couple of questions in the chat.
yeah,
Are you taking them at the end?
yeah,
Or
please go ahead. Yeah, let's
okay.
do it. Just if you want to come on screen, go ahead. Otherwise, we can read.
Okay, fine, no problem. I mean, they are very context specific, so I think it could be better to make it this now. So,
Yeah.
Ishfaq, do you want to make your question?
Yeah, sure, Colin. Cheers. Thanks for going through this. Apologies for my quality of my camera. The jobs map, I asked a question, which I'll ask in a second. I asked it when you first put it on the screen, and I was reading through it. It looks very familiar to me in terms of a user story map, but almost as not task level, but uh, job level. Am I seeing those two similarities? Is that correct?
Yes, they absolutely are correct. I guess the big difference is that in the jobs map, we're really doing this solution agnostic, so it doesn't have a specific product in mind, or a technology, or a touch point, or a channel, or an emotion. So that's where I think there is a bit of a difference, but it's a familiar schema or way of thinking.
Great. Cheers, Colin. That makes a lot of sense. Cheers, buddy.
And Alex?
Yes, hi. So my question is related to the map and then not capturing touch points or technology at this point. So I'm a journey manager, and for me in my practice is very helpful to capture that because I'm in a large company, so I can focus on who needs to be in a journey management series to focus what needs to be resolved or where there are areas of opportunity. So how do you do it with this approach where you don't capture those touch points?
So you would still, so this covers the initial insight phase, and then you would go into a classic design thinking process. So you can blend the methods. So the materials you have are useful, but the reason I think this is additive and it's giving you the different lenses, if you think about your channels and touch points, etc., what impact has AI had or could have in the short term? It could potentially absolutely rip those up because even the need for human contact could disappear. And this is where jobs to be done, if you map that technology agnostic, will give you that insight into where those under and overshared opportunities are, and then you can think about how to address them, if that makes sense, rather than if you're starting with your existing tech stack and channels and operational constraints. It's not a good way to innovate. It's a good way to run a business. So this is more for exploratory breakthrough innovation, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Because otherwise you're kind of going inside out if you say, well, this is our channel and this is our, yeah.
Thank you, Colin.
Any others or any reflections on your experience of jobs to be done, or
Maybe I have a different point of view of looking at it. Am I audible? I think I am audible. Okay. Here a job to be done, isn't it just a different name of first deciding what to be done and step back till the user story? Because normally people think about features and they reach to a point, but here you are telling that first understand what is the pain point or what is missing, and then step backwards and see how technically this can be implemented with as a product. That normally Agile also say it in that way, right? First figure out the gap and then figure out how you can solve it.
Yeah, this, let me just bring up in the I'll just present my screen again. So we developed a toolkit, quite a comprehensive one, about 150 pages, and I'm just going to bring that up because one of the slides in it talks about user stories versus job stories. Yes, it's a really
This
good
is the
question.
ultimate test. I was going to say, Colin, this is the ultimate test. If you can find that one particular slide out of the 100.
Yeah, I know it's here somewhere.
And
Here we
sorry
go.
for asking you
Yeah,
that. It's
so
important to understand the difference.
yeah, so what we can do in jobs to be done is we can create a job story in place of a user story. Now you'll always still ultimately use both, right? But the job story gives you a much broader lens. So it's talking about when in a certain situation, what is the motivation, so the underlying goal or job, and what is the desired outcome. So I give the example here in a dinner party. So when I'm hosting a dinner party after moving to a kind of upmarket neighborhood, I want to create a social experience that showcases my culinary and hosting skills so that I can establish a strong social presence, etc. So it's a lot more contextual and vivid, whereas a user story will be typically points towards a specific feature, if that makes sense. So it's much more expansive when you use a jobs to be done format than when you use a user story, which is for an existing product. So user stories for short term, the next 3 months, are typically really good, but the job story is often good at the outset for a much bigger picture, broader focus, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question? Sorry, Asim?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or?
Oh, let's continue, please.
Yeah. Sorry, just switch back to the yeah, so
Colin, actually, Jennifer has another question. Leave the
Jennifer.
screen. So go, Jennifer, please ask the question. No, leave the screen on, Colin, don't worry. Jennifer? We can't hear you. Okay. I can read. Okay, I can read. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. How do we discern between something that a person needs versus something we imagine or reverse engineer as a need to justify whatever crap someone wants to build?
Oh, good question. So let me jump to exactly this point, right? So what we do in jobs to be done, I'm going to do 2 slides that will hopefully answer this, is rather than capturing a need, which is just a quote like, I'd like, more convenience or something, we capture them in a very specific format and syntax. Now, it looks very complicated, but it's really not once you get your head around it. So what you're trying to do during the user interviews is take what they're saying and put it into a metric format that's measurable. So for example, we talk about either minimize or maximize, and in what is the thing that you want to minimize. So minimize people talking over each other, the object of control, this is the thing you want to influence. So in meetings and any context, which is optional, so large groups, or maximize presenter eye contact during presentations as well. Now, it looks a bit off-putting, but let me just contrast traditional insights versus jobs to be done insights and why it can be helpful. So if we were doing this project for real, we'd probably have a bunch of quotes and percentages saying things like, in a traditional approach, if I'm not leading the meeting, I usually just zone out and check my emails, or it's hard to get a word in edgeways, or security and privacy is a top need. Now, these might be directionally useful and foundational, but they're not very inspiring for innovation. Typically, all of your competitors will know them, and they're quite vague and generalistic, and they're certainly not future-proof. Whereas if I give you an example of these outcome statements, which come from the interviews, minimize people talking over each other in meetings with 12 attendees, or maximize eye contact during meetings. And what we do in Jobs to be Done is there'll typically, for each job, be dozens of outcome statements, and usually 100 plus. And then what we can do is quantitatively, we can rate these on how important is that specific outcome, and then how satisfied are you with current solutions. And that can give you then a priority list of very specific areas for value creation. So if I just give you to round off, and then I'll come back to Jennifer. If we take the job of rehearsing a presentation, the micro job, some of those outcomes are things like minimize the risk of forgetting key points during the presentation, or maximize accurate timing of the presentation, which I'm probably doing a horrible job on. Now, what would the innovations be? Well, it could be stuff, and I know these exist, but things like an AI avatar coach or PowerPoint coach. Or if I give you another example on delivering a presentation, it could be stuff like maximize eye contact. So when I look at my screen, I'm not looking at you as the camera. So some of those innovations, again, already exist. So there's some hardware around cameras that drop in the screen, or AI, or if we're talking about minimizing background noise, again, there are some solutions out there. So I'm hoping you can see that by using Jobs to be Done and getting much more granular at the outcome rather than just a quote, you can really unlock innovation. And I'm not going to say a lot because it gets quite technical, but you can validate these outcomes using a quantitative survey if you want real robustness. So this is where you'd ask for each one, how important is this job to you? And how satisfied are you with the current solutions? And then what you can do is plot it on this nice chart so that you can pinpoint where are the top underserved needs and really micro-target innovation. So it's a bit like switching from design thinking, which can be a bit of a machine gun, to a rifle with a scope to innovating on those targets. But I'll come back to Jennifer. Did that answer your question?
I suppose so.
Yeah. Silence is a sign. Great. I wanted to show you if there aren't any other questions. You've seen the theory, but maybe a real world innovation, because some of these innovations I've pointed out, they already existed. So we actually did another project, so virtual collaboration, but this time in a face-to-face meeting. And a bit like before, a very similar process. We had who are we aiming for? So it was face-to-face meetings, facilitator. We considered lots of different circumstances, very similar jobs map, so unpacking the process. And we zoomed in on one of it. We did this systematically and covered all of them on how do you record a face-to-face meeting and innovate. Now, people groaned when they heard this because people said, well, we already can do that. What about Otter, Fireflies? I'm sure you use some kind of software for recording, even on this Zoom call. But is there an opportunity to innovate? And I hopefully I'll convince you in 2 minutes there really was. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about so far in Jobs to be Done is we could also consider related jobs. So we were targeting the job of facilitating a face-to-face meeting, but in a recording context, conference recording or voice memos or interviews are also applicable. So we can solve for lots of different types of jobs. Now, when we did the interviews with users, we generated 126 outcomes, of which I've just put on screen a selection of about 10. Now, some of those were more towards incremental improvements like, minimize the background noise, or they maximize the transcription accuracy. But some of them really were pointing towards what would be breakthrough solutions and still don't exist. So for example, maximize the ability to capture non-verbal information. So that might be a whiteboard, or how do I record a meeting where there's multiple breakouts and I want to have one transcript or to bring it together. And again, what we did is we prioritized all the 126 needs, but I've just shown a few, and identified some of those top underserved needs. Now, one of the biggest ones actually was so many people want to record meetings in secret without being caught, which poses an ethical dilemma for some of the technology companies. But I can assure you, having spoke to dozens and dozens of users, many people are recording meetings in secret. Now, the reason this led to a breakthrough innovation was the innovation is called Plod Note, and it's the world's first and most successful AI voice recorder. And I'm actually holding one up now, you can't really see it. And it's like a credit card device, huge battery life. And rather than having to take out your laptop if you're in a meeting, drain the battery, this records for you. And the transcription accuracy is absolutely phenomenal, much better than any of the existing solutions. It also can do lots of stuff like, for example, record a phone call, so it clips onto the back of your iPhone. And it's addressing a lot of these specific outcomes that weren't catered for before. And it's been phenomenally successful. So about 750,000 subscribers, because you pay for the device and you subscribe then to minutes of transcription. And it's completely revolutionized for people like me how I capture information. So often for my days, I'll have this switched on because the battery life is near infinite for a full day of meetings, just the whole time I tell people, or workshops. And its ability to synthesize is absolutely phenomenal. It can do things like mind maps that other programs can't do. So I just thought it was a really nice example of how being very granular, even as I'm sure you thought when I talked about innovating and recording meetings, it sounds like an impossible task, but with jobs to be done and these fresh new news insights, you can get to really break through places. Just to round off, I assumed one of the questions is how can you use AI, because everyone's doing it, and in jobs to be done, I've actually underscored the areas I'm not using AI in because it's so common. So you can use this really as a cheat to identify different types of job performers, put stuff in the right structure and syntax, which is really important in jobs to be done. It's a very precise methodology. For the jobs mapping as well, it's brilliant for unpacking those visual charts we saw. The areas I'm not using it on yet, and I have tried, are interviews themselves. So I'm a believer in split testing. So I got some real interviews I did and analysed manually and put those against some AI generated synthetic data. And for at least for my use cases and breakthrough innovation, it wasn't there yet. I'm not saying it won't get there, but I would not abandon human interviews at the moment. And the other thing it can't do is give you prioritization of those outcome statements. Again, that is something that you do need the human intervention, but pretty much everything else, AI is phenomenal. Couple of tips for you. One is if you're using AI for this, use multiple models because they have different underlying data and you will get additive results. So for example, in the job map, if I do Gemini versus ChatGPT, they will give me different charts, different stages. The other one is to use deep research now as well. You can get much more texture on it. And then the final one I wanted to say, and I'll open up for questions, is jobs to be done. It's quite a flexible method. So sometimes if you read the literature, it can seem quite like staid or strategy, and one of the creators, their process is 84 stages, and it really puts a lot of people off and saying it's too complicated, it takes too long. But you can do jobs to be done in quite a focused way. So maybe in a 4-week sprint where you choose a specific job and one job performer segment, and you just run some qualitative interviews, even 8 to 10, and that gives you some insight. Or you can do it much more strategically as a project or maybe enterprise-wide, where you can actually reform your entire strategy, resegment, change your marketing messaging. It can really transform how a business operates. My advice as always is start small. If you haven't experienced jobs to be done, pick a specific project. Maybe if you're in a product management or user experience type role, you don't even have to necessarily tell people you're using it. You could just use it and they'll only care about the end product. So if you can give them some great insight, people don't tend to just, argue about how you get there. So yeah, on this one, we just do qualitative. On this one, we typically do quantitative as well. Final thing is we've built, sorry, a lot of information to absorb today, a comprehensive jobs to be done toolkit. It's the most comprehensive publicly available asset, 150 pages that goes through point by point. I know it sounds a lot, but it's visual and quite simple. We also put together a one-pager so you can print out, and if you're doing a project or in a physical workshop, you can reference each stage. And then finally, launching later this month, we've created a job to be done blueprint. So it's a bit like a template on steroids where it walks you through stage by stage and gives you an example and a little video from me talking about how you fill in each of the boxes. So it's almost the kind of dummies guide to jobs to be done. So do check out those. That's it from me. I know it's a lot to absorb, but I'd love to take questions or hear anyone's experiences of jobs to be done.
Well, thank you, Colin. Yeah, I mean, there is a Jennifer that is asking the links for downloading.
Yeah, let me, these way, if you just go to our website, Mosaic Innovation, and there's a download section. I will put it in the meetup.com as well. You just need to give an email, so we don't spam. So yeah, easy to get.
Yeah, maybe you can also put in the LinkedIn group. Okay, fine.
Yeah, I will put it on it.
Yeah. Good. No, thank you, Colin. Really interesting. Actually, I have to say that my initial 2 as a knowledge of the framework actually should be a 1 because there are everything that you say was absolutely new for me. So good to be here. Any question? Any observation?
Well, yeah, thanks so much, Colin. I think my 1's moved up to a 2. I think I'd need a.
Now I move to a 2. Yes.
I need to. I'd be interested in exploring this more. It's it aligns with a lot of business analysis, requirements gathering, but takes it to a nice deeper level. So and it's coming up with solutionizing as well as a group effort. Seems really interesting. Thanks very much for all the information.
And one thing I should have said, sometimes I mention, I get this groan of it's yet another thing or it's a fad, but the way to think about it is it's complementary and it integrates with other methods. So it's a bit like playing tennis. If design thinking is the forehand, jobs to be done is the backhand. And once you master both, you actually get better at each of them. So they're not contradictory. It's not like, oh, we need to get rid of it. You will use both of them.
Yeah, a handy tool to, as you say, complement existing processes.
Anything else? I'll just say one other thing is annoyingly, and it makes it a bit confusing. If it's not confusing enough, there are 2 variants of jobs to be done. So there's the one I showed you that's the more innovation orientated one. There is another one which I'll not go into detail now, where if you're just looking to sell more of an existing product, which many of you will be, so it's just about incrementally improving your value proposition. There is another variant where you don't use the jobs map. So check out the toolkit in case some people say I'm not working on breakthrough innovation all the time.
Yeah, I see your hand, Alex, but Harvey have put a question in the chat. Harvey, do you want to make your question, ask your question directly to Colin?
Sure. Sorry, I can't put my camera on right now, but Colin, how have you managed to convince people to drop their love and familiarity with design thinking starting points and sort of start with jobs to be done, which I guess people sort of know inherently from Clay Christensen, but actually maybe haven't sort of encompassed in their approaches? How have you sort of managed to break into their well-grooved processes?
So I'll give you, I mean, well, the honest answer is often I haven't, and people have just rejected it and said it's a fad, it's common sense, it's weird, right? So that does happen often. So 3 strategies. The best one I'd say is if you can make it real for people. So I mentioned in the car example at the start, they were sitting nodding along, but arms folded until I showed them that jobs map and immediately it was like a light bulb. The other way to do it is I do have in the toolkit, which let me just bring up now, a slide that for those that are more academic or influenced by data that points out the benefits of jobs to be done. So there's a study that shows it's up to 5 times more effective. And it's also, I put in this one, people that see this, it's a method that's been around for over 20 years. It was developed by Harvard Business School. It's got lots of empirical research. It's used by pretty much all of the leading technology companies. There's hundreds of success stories. So for anyone thinking, is this a fad? Is this some new weird thing? No, it is the #3 innovation method, assuming you exclude Agile. So design thinking, lean startup, and jobs to be done. And then also there's that study I referenced here about it showed it was 5 times more effective. And I think the quote from Clayton Christensen, he talks about innovation success rates for breakthrough innovation being up, failure rates, being up to 80%. Now, in no other business context would you accept that. And innovation, it doesn't have to be the least successful thing you do. But the final strategy I've used, so you've got the show them value, give them the evidence, is you don't need to tell people you're using jobs to be done. So we have did innovation processes before where we've just said, yeah, we're just going to use our tools and methods, and the client doesn't care. And when you bring them the idea or the breakthrough insight, that's all they care about. They just don't really care how you got there. So sometimes if the label is baggage, we don't call it jobs to be done. I just call it, we're doing innovation insight, and it's a bit different than you're used to. So yeah, a few things.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Colin.
Yes. Alex?
Yes, so my question is about your services. As I'm looking at your website, I was primarily interested in any kind of training, and I see there's a tab for that, but I'm not sure I see any specific intake dates or cost. So can you clarify that for me? Is that one of the services you offer?
We do jobs to be done training, but to be honest, we only do private courses. So we do for large enterprise like Mari, HP, BT. We just, when we tried to do the public open courses, could never really make the economics work in terms of getting 12 to 15 people to sign up on the same date. So we don't do public courses.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just give you one. If people want to go deeper, I mean, start with our toolkit because it's genuinely the most visual and simple. There's a book called Jobs to be Done Toolkit published last year by Jim Kalbach, who is the Chief Experience Officer at Mural, which is the big online digital whiteboard service. And that is the best book by far. Part of the reason being because he goes through different variants and is quite agnostic and objective. Whereas some of the other books, they're quite dated, and also they're very big on their proprietary approach, whereas he does all of them. So definitely that's the one to start with.
Is this the book?
Yes, that is the book. So it's fantastic.
Okay, so you can take a note for your library. Yeah, there are a couple of questions. Go, Ishfaq.
Thanks, Corrado. Colin, so I work in Agile space, and I've worked with design thinking before. I worked a lot with user stories. I'm trying to figure out in my head. Now, you said something earlier, which is jobs to be done, innovation, and jobs to be done, current product. A lot of the work that I do is current product, and we're kind of incrementally making it better. Where would this fit in, even if it's the jobs to be done current product toolkit that you have? Where does it fit in? Does it fit in? Sorry, I'm assuming it fits in right at the very start.
Yeah,
What's the next step after that? And does it go straight to user stories, or does it go to design thinking in the middle first? Cheers, Colin.
Yeah, sorry, in the interest of time, I didn't present all of it. The toolkit, I'll try and bring the page up, has exactly that in a visual slide. Yeah, this one here.
You're getting faster with finding your slides.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I'm under pressure. So jobs to it actually starts before design thinking. The reason being because your job can actually define your market. So if you take Kodak, right, as a bit of an example, they said, well, we do cameras, but if you'd thought through a job lens, it should have been we do sharing memories, which would have changed your focus completely. So that's why jobs to be done, it's more strategically influential than design thinking, where typically you used to do customer problems. So overlaps with design thinking. It covers the empathize phase, which is the first part. And then after you do the empathize and define, once you get to ideate, it's part 3 of design thinking, it then goes back to design thinking. But the other area jobs to be done comes in is using those outcome statements to prioritize the roadmap. So it will inform the solution you build, although it doesn't give you any guidance on how you build it, if that makes sense. In the guide as well, and sorry, I'm rushing a bit, it has specifically how it integrates with other methods and why it's like can be in some instances superior. So it does give you that detail as to exactly how it works.
Okay, excellent. That's very good. Thanks, Colin. I'll download your toolkit. Thanks, mate.
And there's a bit at the end on the job stories. And just to be clear, is you'll still have user stories, and the job stories are just at the start of the process in case people are really worried that it's going to rip up your whole process.
Thank you. Cheers, Colin.
Yeah. One more question from Azim. Azim.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I also posted the same in the chat. There are a lot of jargons, a lot of difficult words to understand, just to grasp what job to be done means. So is there a way that you can explain to a non-technical business person in 1 or 2 sentences what this means, or put it differently, what the key message what this delivers, or a layman language? Because it sometimes as a product management people it's difficult to explain. So how you can explain it in 1 or 2 sentences?
Great question. Let me start with an analogy, then a description that I didn't use, right? So jobs to be done is looking at why people buy stuff and innovating rather than what. So let's take the example of a kettle. Now, if I ask, why do you buy a kettle? Most people will instinctively say, to boil water. But you don't buy a kettle to boil water. Most people do it to make coffee. So if you take an innovation like Nespresso, which is a 7 billion valuation in sales, they innovated around the job of how to make the perfect cup of coffee at home, whereas the kettle market's worth half the value of Nespresso, which is a single brand. So that's what jobs to be done is we're looking at the underlying motivations and goals and the circumstances, rather than we're looking through a product or a features lens. Is about as simple as I can explain it, if that makes sense.
I do, means I knew about these things earlier, but I didn't know it called as job to be done definition, because that is normally every successful product have, because they always give a key message than actually selling a product. They always tell why you need it rather than that take this to help you. So thank you. I just didn't know they are both are related.
Yeah. Any others? And I'm happy if anyone wants. I think I'll put my email on the thing to contact me, or have a one-to-one. More than happy to. So if you've got a specific challenge.
I just had another one, Colin, related to any other courses. What I struggle, and I do have that book, I just haven't finished reading it yet. But my struggle is that I've seen some offers in the market, and again, my focus is journey management. So I want to adopt this way of thinking at minimum for getting away from personas, but incorporate it into journey management. And my struggle is that most providers, I think they overcomplicate it. So I don't know if you have any specific recommendations if I'm unable to create a case for a corporate-wide training.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim Kalbach, who wrote the book that you're reading, does some trainings, a public one as well. So that might be a good source. And I know he's got some new modules specifically around, for example, customer experience. I don't want to badmouth anyone, but you may know who I'm talking about. I was with a big bank last week, and they are doing training with one of the leading vendors, and they said it is very complicated and it's switched people off. So Yeah, I mean, any process that's 84 stages to me is not a good process. So yeah, I'll say no more about that. Yeah, and I've just seen a question there about jobs to be done and focusing on functional. Sorry, so because we didn't have a lot of time, jobs to be done does consider social and emotional elements as well. But we start with a functional lens. The reason being because it's much easier to innovate on something functional. So if you take the job of like entertain friends at home, that could really lead to anything, right? So it's not a good way to anchor innovation, rather than if, for example, I take the job of host a dinner party. If I'm a supermarket, I could help you host a great dinner party. Entertain at home, it could just be anything. So you do need to root it in a functional job, but you absolutely need to consider the emotional and social elements. So that was missing from the presentation because of time.
Oh, no, I didn't think that one was missing. Thank you, Colin. No, just is when you were talking about the making a coffee analogy, actually, and I was just thinking, I've actually recently gone back to using a Belletti for that reason. Is that actually it's the enjoyment of the ceremony of it, yeah. And I'm wondering if actually if job is to be done, and also with the drill analogy we were talking about earlier, like with those 3M strips, not quite the same as getting a drill out and sort of destroying a wall is quite satisfying. Yeah. And just wondering if jobs to be done, if that does tend to focus on more of that kind of end point, the purpose of the product rather than the joy of it, or do you think?
No, we would absolutely think that the emotional and social. So emotional needs are how you want to feel or avoid feeling when you do the job. Social needs are how you want to be perceived or not to be perceived by others, if that makes sense. So they're absolutely considered. It's just when you do the jobs map, you're better to start on the functional bit and then overlay the emotional or social, because if you start on the emotional or social, it doesn't give you the anchor. To my point about, have a great night with friends at home, that from an innovation perspective, it's too broad, it's too nebulous. So that's only the part of it.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. Well, really nice to meet you, everybody, and do stay in touch, and I'll share those links we discussed on the platform.
Yeah, in the LinkedIn group, in the meantime, I've opened a task, not a task, a thread, actually, putting the link to download the toolkit, the reference to the book, so we can continue the conversation there eventually. So this is definitely a suggestion to register to the group, by the way. Yeah. Okay. No, I'm just reading in the chat. I cannot find other email. I see some funny comment. Yeah. Well, if there are any other question or comment, let me say thank you, Colin, for sharing this. It was really helpful, something new. So absolutely amazing. Thank you very much for sharing. And keep in touch on the different channels. I have the reference of Colin. He is available on LinkedIn and so on. Okay.
So, thank you all.
Cheers, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing, and thanks a lot, Colin. Catch you on LinkedIn, mate. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.